Zorgamazoo, chapter 3. And in chapter 2, remember we met the Zorgal. Remember, he kind of looks like a bear, but he has horns. And they live underground, and he is like a newspaper man. But he always comes late because he's taking care of his dad. And then at the very end, they were talking about how everyone had been, everyone in Zorgamazoo was missing. And I think he thought that that was maybe a story. And remember, his dad was very adventurous and he wasn't. And so then at the very end it said Katrina, remember that was the girl who thought she saw something, and Morty, that's the Zorgal, their fates are entwined. So there they are right there. Okay, so chapter 3, the lobotomy dock. We now shall return to Katrina Cottrell, who was feeling unhappy and rather unwell. She had sadly been locked in her bedroom alone by the hand of her guardian, Mrs. Crabone. Perhaps the one question you're anxious to know is regarding her parents, like where did they go? Well, in stories like these, as I'm sure you have read, the parents quite often are thoroughly dead. Run over by rhinos or gored by a moose, or murdered when somebody poisoned their juice. In this case, however, I'm sorry to say her parents weren't dead, they were merely away. They were wealthy, you see. They were captains of trade, adept in the ways in which money was made. So they traveled a lot, a tremendous amount, while charging it all to a corporate account. Theirs was a world of banking and loans, of virtual meetings and cellular phones, of foreign investments and business affairs, of taxis and boardrooms and leathery chairs. All of their life was spent up in the air, incessantly flying from here and to there, from Lisbon to London, from Paris to Rome. They had gone off on business and never come home. Why, even Katrina was born on the fly, on a company jet that was up in the sky. Her mother, of course, was underprepared. A baby? How awkward, the woman declared. I haven't got time for raising a kid, and I doubt that I'd want to, if even I did. When her father got word that Katrina was born, he grimaced a little and got on the horn. He called his accountant to raise a concern. On babies, he asked, what's the rate of return? So you see, my good reader, her parents were duds. Too much of the blue in the both of their bloods. This was the reason Katrina was thrown together with Mrs. Grimelda Crabone, which of course made Katrina abundantly glum to be languishing under her guardian's thumb. It's not fair, she was thinking. It's simply not right, being locked in my room without dinner tonight. Such were the thoughts that were filling her head as she hungrily hunched on the edge of her bed. But just as her anger was reaching its peak, from the silence below there came an ominous creak. Katrina was puzzled, she thought with a frown. Who would be calling to this part of town? A prowler, perhaps, or a murderer might? Who else would come visit so late in the night? She climbed to her knees with an ear to the floor. With her hands on the carpet, she listened for more. From below came an almost inaudible drone, but she knew who it was by its nasally tone. Old Crabby, she thought in a logical leap. Why, now that old bat should be snoring asleep. Yet old Crabby was up. She was talking as well, but why and to whom, thought Katrina Cottrell. It was then she recalled what old Crabby had said and what she was planning to do with her head. Could it really be true? Was she being sincere? She'd invited some wacko and now he was here. Katrina stood up. It would likely be best to break out of her room on a miniature quest. She would snoop just a bit, go sneaking around. She would sort out the source of this mysterious sound. She pulled up the carpet there where no one would look, revealing an almost invisible nook. And there in the dark was a treasury trunk filled with a clutter of jumble and junk. Most people would think it was nothing but fluff, a collection of doodads and whatchama stuff. To Katrina, however, one thing was true. This stuff came in handy. You just never knew. She dug up a spring from a grandfather clock. It was just the right thingy to jimmy a lock. She twisted the spring and she made it a key. She was rather inventive, I'm sure you can see. Then gripping the spring in her sensitive fist, she opened the latch with a flick of her wrist. Then quietly pacing with caution and care, she crept down the hall to the top of the stair, and down a few steps, like a gossamer ghost, she peered round a lopsided banister post. A man stood below, on the entranceway mat. His collar turned up to the brim of his hat. He took off his gloves, his cap, and his coat. He loosened his muffler that covered his throat. His features were drawn and incredibly dark, but his eyes were aglow with a sinister spark. Old Crabby was there. She was wringing her hands like a criminal hatching felonious plans. She quietly spoke to the man in the hall. Doctor, I'm glad you could answer my call. It's nice you could visit so late in the night. I'm certain your skill will set everything right. You'll cut out the naughtiest bits of her brain, so only the parts that are normal remain. I will do what I can, the stranger replied. Your need for a surgeon cannot be denied, because, madame, your case is a serious one, so let us discuss it. Just what's to be done? Above in the stairwell, Katrina was still, her fingers and throat in the grip of a chill. The stranger, she sensed by his timbre and tone, was the sort to send shivers that shook to the bone. Now here's what Katrina so beautifully heard as her guardian spoke in a whispering word. It's my girl. She's upstairs and she's coming unwound. Why, she's quite a few ounces short of a pound. Delusions of grandeur, that's what she's got. She thinks she's so special, she thinks she's so hot. She thinks of herself as courageous and brave, but doctor, I wish she would simply behave. But her brain is diseased, it's gone on the blink. She's completely insane, she's right on the brink. Why, only today she redoubled my doubt by claiming some creature was skulking about. Some sort of beastie with horns on his head and wearing a tie, or that's what she said. As he listened, the doctor was thumbing his case, silent and solemn and gazing in space. His brow furrowed up like a fisherman's knot and cried, "We must strike while the iron is hot. Her condition is worse than at first I'd assumed, so we mustn't delay or else she is doomed. It is clear to me now that certainly she's got parapsychotic delusion disease. There is only one method to fix it within, which I'll demonstrate now before I begin." He opened his bag with imperious pride, and Katrina saw horrible things were inside. Needles and skewers that filled her with fright as they glinted and shone in the shadowy light. The doctor reached deep in his medical case and took out a tool too gruesome to face. It looked like a drill, but especially made, with clappers and claws and a rotary blade. He fondled this thing with the subtlest touch. "I love it," he cried, "oh, ever so much. It's the finest, most delicate tool of its kind. It's the cranial puncturing mincer of mind. And if you'll excuse some innocuous fun, I'll demonstrate now how the mincing is done." He spun on his heel and he leapt in the air, recalling the cadence of Freddy Astaire, but never as nimble, not nearly as spry, more like a hippo with mud in its eye. He leaped and he danced with his terrible tool, he flourished and spun like a blathering fool. "Madame," he puffed, when his dancing was done, "in the surgical world I am second to none. So you've nothing to fear, for I'll snip off her top. I flip up her lid and I'll give her the chop." But old Crabby was bored. She looked up at the clock. She was eager to get to the butchery block. "Dr. LaFang," she said with a smile, "I don't mean to rush you or hamper your style, but perhaps we should start by moving upstairs. It's best if Katrina is caught unawares. It's not that your banter is dreary or dull, it's just that I'm anxious to crack at her skull." They both looked above at the balcony ledge, but Katrina already had left from the edge. She had scampered away and back to her bed, trembling with panic and dizzy with dread. It would seem she was caught in a bit of a scrape, and the only way out was to stage an escape. So she packed up a sack full of clothing and socks and much of the junk from her treasury box. Then she tied up her sheets in a delicate line like Tarzan would do with a tropical vine. One end she tied to the foot of her bed, while the other she tossed out the window instead. Then she leapt out herself, swung down on the sheets, rappelling below to the dark of the streets, while up in her bedroom old Crabby was there, ranting and raving and tearing her hair. She had searched all the rooms from hither to yon, and discovered Katrina was thoroughly gone. She howled with a shriek that was bitter and shrill. It was just as the doctor leaned over the sill. "Look out the window," he said with a scoff. "I wonder why all of my patients run off." Mrs. Crabone cried, "Don't mess around. We could catch her again if we get to the ground." She wrangled the doctor away by his cuff, and they sped down the stairs in a tumbling huff. But when they arrived at the base of the stair, Katrina was gone by barely a hair. She had fled. She was free. Not a moment too soon. She had scampered away by the light of the moon. She had escaped. Yes, she'd escaped when the timing was right, but what dangers awaited out there in the night. Meanwhile, old Crabby was red as a beet. She was gnashing her teeth. She was stomping her feet. She clutched at the collar of Dr. LaFang, subjecting the man to a hairy harangue. "You listen to me, you incompetent quack! If it wasn't for you and your yakety yak, I'd have my Katrina now under the knife. She would finally give me some peace in my life. But instead of my peace, as I'm sure you can guess, I get only a lousy, lamentable mess. So listen up good, you botchery buff, you bungler, you dunce, you pandering puff. May it take us a week, a month, or a year, we will find my Katrina and bring her back here. Then using that miserable mincer of mine, you'll finish the job that you were assigned." So Mrs. Crabone and the doctor as well began searching the streets for Katrina Cottrell. They scoured the ground, they hunted and hoped, they rummaged and rooted and grabbled and groped. They sniffed with their noses, they narrowed their eyes, they even looked up to the dark of the skies. They listened as well, but heard nothing at all, just the flap of the sheets that hung from the wall. Dun, dun, dun. Chapter 4 is next.